Since he was a puppy, he was the pride of the family. But everything changed when signs of weakness began to appear. With no money and far from the city, his owner had to choose between giving up or fighting the impossible. So go ahead and subscribe to see how far the strength of this bond can truly go. From the very beginning, the lynx had been Ethan Miller's pride and joy. In the remote hills of Montana, where the wilderness stretched for miles beyond his modest cabin, Ethan had found in this extraordinary creature something that had been missing from his life for years: purpose. He'd rescued the cub 5 years ago when he found it abandoned near his property, its mother nowhere to be found. The local wildlife ranger, an old friend named Frank, had reluctantly allowed Ethan to care for the animal after confirming it wouldn't survive on its own. "You sure about this, Ethan?" Frank had asked, concern etched on his weathered face. "A wild animal ain't like some house cat." Ethan, a man of few words and many losses, had simply nodded. "We'll figure it out together." And they had. He named the Lynx Scout, a testament to the animal's curious nature and watchful eyes. Through patient training and genuine affection, Scout had become more than just a pet. He was Ethan's silent companion in a life marked by solitude. After losing his wife Rebecca to illness 3 years prior and watching his only son move to the East Coast for college, Ethan had found in Scout a reason to keep his cabin in order, to rise with the sun, to continue. The early spring morning began like any other, with Ethan preparing a simple breakfast while Scout lounged on the handmade bed near the fireplace. But something was different. The lynx, normally alert and eager for his morning meal, barely lifted his head when Ethan called him. "Scout, come on, buddy, breakfast." The lynx's eyes, usually bright and attentive, seemed dull. He attempted to stand but wobbled slightly before settling back down. Ethan felt a knot form in his stomach. Over the next few days, Scout's condition worsened. He ate less, moved less, and spent most of his time sleeping. Ethan tried different foods, even hunting fresh game that Scout had always loved, but nothing seemed to rouse the animal's appetite. "It's just a phase," Ethan told himself, rubbing Scout's ears as they sat together on the porch, watching the sunset paint the Montana sky in brilliant oranges and purples. "You'll be back to your old self soon." But deep down, Ethan knew something was wrong. The nearest veterinarian was in Pinewood, almost 3 hours away, and money had been tight since he'd been laid off from the lumber mill last winter. He'd been making ends meet by selling handcrafted furniture, but it barely covered the essentials. A specialized vet visit would cost money he simply didn't have. When Scout refused to eat for the 3rd day in a row, Ethan knew he couldn't wait any longer. He loaded the lynx into his aging pickup truck at dawn and made the long drive to Pinewood, his hands gripping the steering wheel so tightly his knuckles turned white. Dr. Sarah Collins had been the town's veterinarian for over 15 years. She specialized in domestic animals, but had occasionally treated wildlife brought in by rangers. When Ethan carried Scout into her clinic, her eyebrows shot up in surprise. "That's not something you see every day," she remarked, gesturing for Ethan to place the lynx on the examination table. "How long have you had him?" 5 years, Ethan replied, watching anxiously as she began her examination. "Found him as a cub. Frank Daniels from Wildlife Services knows about him. Said he couldn't make it in the wild." Dr. Collins nodded, her hands moving methodically over Scout's body while the lynx remained uncharacteristically docile. "He's clearly bonded to you. That's rare." For nearly an hour, she conducted tests, drew blood, and examined Scout from nose to tail. Ethan stood silently in the corner, his worn baseball cap twisted in his hands, watching her face for any sign of what might be wrong. Finally, she stepped back with a sigh that Ethan immediately recognized as bad news. "Mr. Miller, I wish I had better news for you. Scout has a rare autoimmune condition that's attacking his system. It's uncommon in wild cats, but when it happens, it's usually difficult to treat. But there is treatment? Ethan asked, his voice steady despite the fear rising in his chest. Dr. Collins hesitated. There are medications that might help, but they're expensive and not guaranteed to work. Given his species and the advanced state of the disease, I have to be honest with you, his chances aren't good. Ethan nodded slowly, absorbing the blow. How much? When she told him the cost of the medication and ongoing treatment, Ethan's heart sank. It was more than he could possibly afford. He thanked her, paid for the examination with most of the cash he had left, and carefully placed Scout back in his truck. The drive home was silent, except for Scout's labored breathing. Ethan's mind raced, trying to think of ways to get the money. He could sell some tools, maybe even part of his land, but it wouldn't be enough fast. Enough. Back at the cabin, he gently placed Scout on his bed and sat beside him, running his calloused hand over the lynx's spotted fur. We'll figure something out, he promised, though his voice lacked conviction. We always do. That evening, as Ethan was researching natural remedies on his old, barely functioning laptop, a loud engine sound disrupted the quiet. Through the window, he saw a gleaming black pickup truck pulling up his driveway, kicking up dust. The vehicle was new and expensive, out of place in this part of the mountains. A man stepped out, dressed in hunting gear that looked too clean to have seen much use. Ethan reluctantly went to the door, instinctively checking that Scout was out of sight in the bedroom. "Howdy, neighbor," the man called out with exaggerated friendliness. "Name's Tyler Jackson. Just bought the Hendersons' old place down the road." Ethan nodded curtly. "Ethan Miller. Welcome to the area." Tyler's smile was wide, but didn't reach his eyes. "Appreciate that. Just getting to know the locals. Beautiful country up here. Perfect for hunting, I hear." "If you have the proper licenses," Ethan replied, not inviting the man in. Tyler laughed, a sound that grated on Ethan's nerves. Of course. Actually, I heard something interesting in town today. They say you've got yourself some kind of pet mountain cat, a lynx." Ethan felt a chill run down his spine. "Who told you that?" "Oh, you know how small towns talk. Thought it sounded like quite the story. Would love to see the creature sometime. I'm something of a collector myself. Exotic pets, hunting trophies. I appreciate rare specimens." The way Tyler said specimens made Ethan's skin crawl. He'd met men like this before, men who viewed wildlife as commodities to be possessed or displayed. "Not much to see," Ethan replied flatly. "And he's not feeling well." Tyler's eyes narrowed slightly, his smile faltering. "Sorry to hear that. If you ever need to, find him a new home, someone who could afford proper care, I'd be interested. I'd pay generously." The implication was clear, and anger flared in Ethan's chest. "He already has a home. Good night, Mr. Jackson." Tyler's smile disappeared completely as Ethan began to close the door. "Think about it, Miller. Wild animals belong with people who can handle them properly. Or in the wild, nowhere else." Ethan shut the door, his heart pounding. Through the window, he watched Tyler's truck disappear down the road. The encounter left him with a sense of foreboding that he couldn't shake. In the bedroom, Scout had managed to lift his head. His ears perked forward as if sensing Ethan's distress. Ethan sat beside him, scratching under his chin. "Don't worry, buddy. Nobody's taking you anywhere," he promised, even as worry gnawed at him. With Scout sick and this new neighbor showing uncomfortable interest, Ethan felt the walls closing. He needed help. But in these remote mountains, help was hard to come by. That night, as a spring storm rolled in over the mountains, Ethan began mixing the first batch of herbal remedies he'd researched. Native Americans had used these plants for centuries to treat illness, and right now, these ancient cures were all he had. Outside, thunder rumbled like a warning, and rain lashed against the windows of the small cabin. "We've weathered worse," Ethan murmured to Scout, who watched him with trusting eyes. "And we'll weather this too." But deep down, Ethan wasn't sure. For the first time since he'd found Scout as an abandoned cub, he feared the dawn might bring challenges he wasn't prepared to face. The storm continued through the night, its intensity matching the turmoil in Ethan's heart. By morning, the rain had ceased, but dark clouds still hung heavy in the sky, casting the cabin in a gloomy half-light. Scout had barely touched the herbal mixture Ethan had prepared, and his breathing seemed more labored than before. Ethan stood at the window, coffee cup in hand, watching as the first rays of sunlight struggled to pierce the clouds. He hadn't slept, his mind racing with concerns about Scout's health and the unsettling visit from his new neighbor. Something about Tyler Jackson didn't sit right with him. The man's interest in Scout felt predatory, not compassionate. A soft whimper from Scout's bed drew Ethan's attention. The lynx was attempting to stand, his legs trembling with the effort. Ethan rushed to his side, gently supporting him. "Easy, buddy. Take it slow." Scout managed a few shaky steps before settling back down, his golden eyes fixed on Ethan with what seemed like apology. Ethan stroked his fur reassuringly. "You've got nothing to be sorry for. We're in this together." Determined to try everything possible, Ethan spent the morning researching more natural remedies. His grandfather, a half-Cherokee man who had taught him to respect the land and its creatures, had once shown him various healing plants that grew in the mountains. Armed with this knowledge and what he could find online, Ethan prepared to venture into the forest to gather ingredients. As he was about to leave, the phone rang, a rare occurrence in his isolated home. It was Dr. Collins from the veterinary clinic. "Mr. Miller, I've been thinking about Scout. There's an experimental treatment that might help. It's not FDA approved for wildlife yet, but I've seen promising results in similar cases." Hope flared in Ethan's chest. "What kind of treatment?" "It's a specialized immunotherapy. The problem is, it's even more expensive than what we discussed, and I'd need to bring in a specialist from Bozeman." When she named the figure, Ethan's hope flickered. It might as well have been $1 million. "I appreciate the call, Doc, but unless you take payment in handmade rocking chairs, I don't see how I can afford that." There was a pause on the line. "There's a foundation that sometimes helps with cases like this, wildlife rehabilitation and such. I could make a call, but I can't promise anything." Ethan thanked her, trying not to let his desperation show. After hanging up, he knelt beside Scout. "Hang in there, partner. We're not giving up." With renewed determination, Ethan headed into the forest, basket in hand, to gather the medicinal plants he needed. The woods had always been his sanctuary, a place where the complexities of human life seemed to fade against the simple truths of nature. Today, however, even the forest felt charged with tension, as if the very trees were aware of his struggle. For hours, Ethan carefully harvested what he needed: echinacea for immune support, yarrow for inflammation, and several other plants his grandfather had taught him about. As he worked, he felt a strange sense of being watched. Several times he paused, scanning the tree line, but saw nothing out of place. On his way back to the cabin, a flash of color caught his eye, a patch of rare purple coneflowers growing in a small clearing. These were particularly potent for immune support, according to his grandfather. As Ethan bent to carefully harvest a few, the crack of a breaking branch made him spin around. Tyler Jackson stood at the edge of the clearing, rifle slung casually over his shoulder, that same insincere smile plastered on his face. "Well, well, quite the herbalist, aren't we?" Tyler's gaze flickered to the basket in Ethan's hands. "Gathering tea ingredients?" Ethan straightened, instinctively shielding the basket. "Just enjoying my property." Tyler's eyebrows rose. "Your property? I believe this is public land, Miller. Or did you buy up half the mountain when I wasn't looking? I've lived here 20 years. These woods are as much mine as anyone's. Tyler stepped closer, his smile tightening. That lynx of yours? Heard he's not doing too well. Sick animals can be dangerous, unpredictable. Might be better for everyone if he were properly handled. The thinly veiled threat hung in the air between them. Ethan's fingers tightened, around the basket handle. Scout's not dangerous, never has been. That's not what the law says. Tyler's voice took on a smug tone. Montana wildlife codes are pretty clear about keeping predator species as pets. One call to the game warden. Frank knows about Scout, Ethan interrupted. Has since I found him. Tyler shrugged. Frank Daniels is retiring next month. His replacement might not be so flexible about regulations. With that, Tyler tipped his hat in mock politeness and turned to leave. Think about my offer, Miller. Better the cat goes to someone who can appreciate him than to a wildlife officer who'll just put him down. Ethan watched him disappear among the trees, anger and fear churning in his gut. Tyler's threat wasn't idle. Ethan knew the law was technically on the newcomer's side. Without proper documentation proving Scout had been legally acquired and registered, he could lose him to authorities. Back at the cabin, Ethan found Scout had moved from his bed to the front window, as if waiting for his return. The sight of the lynx making such an effort despite his weakness brought a lump to Ethan's throat. "Miss me, did you?" he murmured, setting down his basket to stroke Scout's head. The lynx leaned into his touch, a low rumble of contentment vibrating in his chest. Throughout the afternoon, Ethan prepared various herbal infusions and poultices, coaxing Scout to consume what he could and applying the rest to his fur and paw. Pads, as his grandfather had taught him. Whether from the remedies or sheer will, Scout seemed marginally more alert by evening, even accepting a small piece of rabbit meat, the first solid food he'd eaten in days. As darkness fell, Ethan sat on the porch steps, Scout resting beside him, both watching the stars emerge in the clear night sky. The storm had passed, leaving the air fresh and crisp. In moments like these, it was easy to believe everything would somehow work out. The peaceful moment was shattered by headlights sweeping up the driveway. Ethan tensed, immediately suspecting Tyler had returned. Instead, a familiar forestry service truck came into view, and Frank Daniels emerged, his expression grave. "Evening, Ethan. Hope I'm not disturbing you." "Never," Ethan replied, genuinely glad to see his old friend. "Coffee?" Inside, as Frank settled at the kitchen table, his eyes kept drifting to Scout, who had returned to his bed by the fireplace. "He doesn't look good," Frank observed quietly. "No," Ethan agreed, placing a steaming mug before his friend. "Autoimmune disease, according to the vet." Frank nodded solemnly. "That's partly why I'm here. Got a call from Dr. Collins today. She mentioned Scout's condition." He paused, clearly uncomfortable with what he had to say next. "Also got another call from Tyler Jackson." Ethan's jaw tightened. "Let me guess. He's concerned about the dangerous wild animal I'm harboring." "Something like that," Frank sighed, running a hand through his thinning gray hair. "Look, Ethan, you know I've always looked the other way with Scout. You saved that cub when nobody else would have bothered. But Jackson's making noise, and with me retiring soon." "He mentioned that," Ethan said bitterly. "Didn't waste any time, did he?" Frank shook his head. "He's connected, Ethan. His uncle sits on the State Wildlife Commission, and he's determined to either buy Scout from you or have him confiscated." The news hit Ethan like a physical blow. "Why? What's his game?" "From what I hear, he's got quite the collection of exotic animals at his place in Texas. Legal ones, supposedly. But there are rumors." Frank trailed off, his implication clear. Ethan's thoughts raced. If Tyler managed to get Scout taken away, the lynx wouldn't survive the stress in his weakened state. And if Tyler somehow got his hands on him directly, "What do I need to do, Frank, to make everything legal?" Frank pulled a folder from his jacket. I brought the paperwork. Retroactive permit application, health certification, special wildlife holding license. But it's not that simple. You'd need to prove Scout was obtained legally, that he can't be released into the wild, and that you have proper facilities for him. Plus, there's a substantial fee. Ethan flipped through the papers, his heart sinking at the complexity and cost. How much time do I have? Not much. Jackson's pushing for immediate action. I can stall for maybe a week, 2 at most. They talked late into the night, Frank providing what advice he could. Before leaving, the old ranger knelt beside Scout, gently patting his head. "You're a fighter, aren't you?" he murmured. To Ethan, he added, "There's a local herbalist up near Whitefish, Amanda Green. Native woman, knows more about traditional medicine than anyone in the state. Might be worth talking to her." After Frank left, Ethan sat beside Scout, the permit papers spread before him, feeling the walls closing in. Between Scout's illness and Tyler's threats, he was fighting a battle on 2 fronts with dwindling resources and time. Scout shifted, resting his head on Ethan's knee, as he'd done countless times before. Despite everything, the simple gesture filled Ethan with resolve. He would find a way. He had to. The next morning broke clear and cold. Ethan woke before dawn, having fallen asleep beside Scout on the floor. His back protested as he stood, but his mind was clear. He would drive to Whitefish today to find this herbalist. It was a long shot, but right now, long shots were all he had. As he prepared to leave, making Scout as comfortable as possible and leaving plenty of water and soft food within reach, a knock at the door startled him. It was too early for casual visitors, and Frank would have called first. Cautiously, Ethan opened the door to find a woman in her mid-30s standing on his porch. She wore hiking boots, jeans, and a worn leather jacket, her dark hair pulled back in a practical ponytail. Something about her stance, confident yet compassionate, reminded Ethan of his late wife. "Mr. Miller, I'm Jesse Armstrong. Dr. Collins sent me. I work with the Montana Wildlife Rehabilitation Center." Her eyes, a deep shade of brown, held his steadily. "I understand you have a lynx who needs help." For a moment, Ethan stood frozen in the doorway, uncertain whether this unexpected visitor represented help or another complication. Trust didn't come easily to him, especially not after Tyler Jackson's threats. But something in Jesse Armstrong's direct gaze made him step aside. "He's in here," Ethan said simply, leading her to where Scout lay on his cushioned bed. Jessie approached the lynx slowly, her movements deliberate and respectful. To Ethan's surprise, Scout lifted his head, regarding the stranger with curiosity rather than the wariness he typically showed around newcomers. "Hello there, beautiful," she murmured, kneeling a few feet away. She didn't reach out to touch him, just sat quietly, allowing Scout to observe her. "Dr. Collins told me about his condition. May I?" Ethan nodded, and only then did Jessie extend her hand, allowing Scout to sniff her before she gently examined him. Her touch was confident but gentle, and Scout tolerated her examination with unusual patience. "The herbs you've been using," she said, noticing the remnants of Ethan's poultices. "Cherokee medicine?" Ethan raised an eyebrow. "How did you know?" "My grandmother was Blackfoot. Different tribe, similar approaches to healing." She smiled slightly. "You've done well with what you have, but he needs more specialized care." "I was just about to drive to Whitefish," Ethan explained. "Frank Daniels mentioned an herbalist there, Amanda Green." Jessie nodded. "Amanda's good. She's helped us at the center many times, but before you make that trip, let me show you what I brought." From her backpack, Jessie produced several small containers of herbs and tinctures, along with a vial of what looked like medicine. "This is a concentrated extract of echinacea, golden seal, and several other immune-supporting herbs. It's helped similar cases at our center, and this," she held up the vial, "is the experimental medication Dr. Collins mentioned." Ethan's eyes widened. I can't afford. It's covered, Jessie interrupted, her expression softening. The Montana Wildlife Fund has a grant for cases like this. Dr. Collins applied on your behalf yesterday. Disbelief and cautious hope warred within Ethan. Why would they help Scout? He's not even officially wildlife anymore. Jessie's gaze met his. Because every life matters, Mr. Miller. And because the bond between you two is something worth preserving. She paused, then added more pragmatically, plus, lynx populations in this region have been declining. Whether in the wild or in your care, every lynx is valuable to Montana's ecosystem and heritage. For the next hour, Jessie showed Ethan how to administer the medication and prepare the herbal supplements. Scout seemed to respond to her presence, his eyes more alert than they had been in days. Before leaving, she promised to return the following day to check on his progress. One more thing, she said at the door, her expression turning serious. Dr. Collins mentioned your neighbor, Tyler Jackson. I know him by reputation. He's been cited twice for wildlife violations in Wyoming before moving here. Nothing that stuck, but still concerning. Be careful. After Jessie left, Ethan sat with Scout, processing this unexpected turn of events. The lynx had already consumed more food than he had in days, and though still weak, there was a new alertness in his eyes. Looks like our luck might be changing, buddy, Ethan murmured, feeling hope for the first time in weeks. Over the next few days, Jessie returned as promised, each visit bringing noticeable improvement in Scout's condition. The medication, combined with the herbal treatments, seemed to be working. By the fourth day, Scout was able to walk around the cabin without stumbling, and his appetite had returned. During her visits, Ethan learned more about Jessie. She had grown up on a ranch near Missoula, studied wildlife biology, and now split her time between the rehabilitation center and freelance photography. Her kitchen walls, she told him, were covered with images of Montana's wildlife, including several lynxes she'd tracked and photographed in the wild. Not as handsome as Scout, though, she added with a smile that brought unexpected warmth to Ethan's chest. On her fifth visit, as they sat on the porch watching Scout cautiously explore the yard for the first time in weeks, Jessie brought up the paperwork Frank had left. Have you started the permit process? Ethan shook his head. Been focused on getting him better first. Besides, not sure I can meet all the requirements. Jessie was quiet for a moment, then said, the center might be able to help with that too. We could classify Scout as a rehabilitation. A case that became an ambassador animal. It would simplify the paperwork and reduce the fees. Why would you do that? Ethan asked, still struggling to accept that strangers would extend such help. Jessie's eyes followed Scout as he sniffed at a pine cone. Because what you've done for him matters. Too many people view wildlife as either resources to be used or nuisances to be eliminated. You saw him as a being worthy of care and respect. She turned to meet his gaze. That's worth supporting. The juicy sincerity in her voice silenced any further questions. Together they watched as Scout, seemingly aware of their attention, looked back at them with what could almost be described as pride in his small accomplishment. That evening, after Jessie had gone, Ethan began filling out the permit applications with renewed purpose. He was so absorbed in the task that he almost missed the sound of an approaching vehicle. Looking out, he recognized Tyler Jackson's black truck pulling up. Quickly, Ethan called Scout inside and closed the door just as Tyler stepped out of his vehicle, this time accompanied by a younger man with a camera. Evening, Miller, Tyler called, his false friendliness even more pronounced. Thought I'd stop by and see if you'd reconsidered my offer. This here's Pete from the local paper. Thought he might be interested in doing a story on your unusual pet situation. The implied threat was clear. Publicity was the last thing Ethan needed while Scout's legal status was still in question. Stepping onto the porch and closing the door behind him, Ethan faced Tyler with barely contained anger. Nothing to reconsider. Scout's not for sale, and he's not a story for the papers. Tyler's smile didn't falter. That's a shame. Public interest in exotic pets is at an all-time high. Pete here could make you something of a local celebrity. The photographer looked uncomfortable, as if just realizing he was being used as leverage. In a private dispute. Not interested, Ethan replied flatly. Tyler sighed dramatically. Well, I tried the friendly approach, but I should inform you that I've filed a formal complaint with the wildlife department. Without proper permits, that cat can't legally stay here. My uncle assures me they'll be sending someone to investigate. Very soon. Ethan's hands clenched at his sides. You really want Scout that badly? It's not about what I want, Tyler replied, his false concern transparent. It's about what's legal. Wild animals belong in the wild or in proper facilities, not in backwoods cabins with amateur caretakers. The photographer cleared his throat awkwardly. Mr. Jackson, I think I have enough for the background piece. I should get going. Tyler waved him off, his eyes never leaving Ethan's. Consider this your final chance, Miller. $10,000 cash for a sick animal that's costing you money you don't have. Be reasonable. Inside, Scout let out a low growl, audible even through the closed door. Tyler's eyes darted to the door. A flash of something, was it fear, crossing his face before his smug expression returned. Think it over. I'll be back tomorrow for your answer. With that, he turned and strode back to his truck, the photographer hurrying after him. As soon as they were gone, Ethan went back inside to find Scout standing alert, his fur slightly raised along his spine. The lynx's golden eyes were fixed on the door, as if he understood exactly what had just transpired. It's okay, buddy, Ethan assured him, kneeling to stroke his fur. He's not getting his hands on you, I promise. That night, Ethan called Frank to update him on Tyler's visit and threat of official complaint. The old ranger sounded tired. He's not bluffing, Ethan. His uncle called me today, asking about your case specifically. I've delayed as much as I can, but they're sending an inspector out next week. We need to get those permits filed immediately. After hanging up, Ethan called Jessie, grateful she'd left her number. She answered on the second ring, and the relief in her voice when he explained the situation was palpable. I'll be there first thing tomorrow. We'll get the application finished and submitted, and I'll bring Lisa Chen from the center. She's on the State Wildlife Advisory Board and can expedite the process. Thank you, Ethan said, the words feeling inadequate for the lifeline she was offering. Try to get some rest, Ethan. We'll figure this out. True to her word, Jessie arrived early the next morning with Lisa Chen, a petite, efficient woman whose credentials impressed even Ethan. Together they completed the paperwork, with Lisa making several calls to colleagues to smooth the process. Normally, this would take weeks, Lisa explained, but given the circumstances and Scout's health, I've convinced them to fast-track the review. We should have an answer in 48 hours. As they worked, Scout seemed to sense the importance of their task, staying close to Ethan and occasionally approaching Jessie for reassurance. When Lisa knelt to examine him as part of the health certification, he submitted to her touch with surprising docility. He's remarkable, Lisa commented. Lisa, most lynxes never adapt this well to human presence, even in rehabilitation settings. He's special, Jessie agreed, catching Ethan's eye with a smile that made something shift in his chest. By midday, everything was in order. Lisa departed with the completed application, promising to submit it immediately and keep them updated. Jessie stayed behind, helping Ethan prepare Scout's medications for the day. As they worked, side by side in the small kitchen, Ethan found himself opening up about his life, his years with Rebecca, their son Michael, who now rarely called, the solitude that had become both comfort and burden until Scout came along. Jessie listened without judgment, occasionally sharing pieces of her own story, Her divorce 3 years ago, her decision to leave a promising career in Bozeman to work with wildlife, a small cabin near the rehabilitation center where she lived alone, except for an ancient cat named Theo. "We're both a bit isolated out here, aren't we?" she observed, her tone gentle rather than pitying. Ethan nodded. "Used to prefer it that way. Now, I'm not so sure." Their conversation was interrupted by the sound of tires on gravel. Through the window, they saw Tyler's truck approaching once again. This time, however, he wasn't alone. A sheriff's department vehicle followed behind him. "Looks like he's escalating," Jessie muttered, her expression hardening. "Let me handle this." Before Ethan could protest, she was out the door, striding confidently toward the approaching vehicles. Tyler emerged from his truck, his customary smirk faltering slightly at the sight of her. From the sheriff's car stepped not a deputy, as Ethan had feared, but Sheriff Dave Hawkins himself, a man Ethan had known for years but rarely interacted with. Through the window, Ethan watched as Jessie spoke with both men, her posture professional but firm. He couldn't hear what was being said, but Tyler's face grew increasingly flushed, while the sheriff's expression transitioned from official sternness to something resembling annoyance, directed not at Jessie, but at Tyler. After several minutes, the sheriff nodded to Jessie, tipped his hat toward the cabin where Ethan stood watching, and returned to his vehicle. Tyler remained, clearly arguing with Jessie, who stood her ground without visible intimidation. Finally, Tyler threw up his hands in apparent frustration, stormed back to his truck, and drove away with a spray of gravel. Only then did Jessie return to the cabin, a satisfied smile playing at her lips. "What just happened?" Ethan asked as she stepped inside. "Sheriff Hawkins is an old friend of my father's," she explained. "Tyler tried to convince him that Scout was being kept illegally and posed a danger to the community. I informed them both that the proper permits were already filed with state authorities, with the backing of the Montana Wildlife Rehabilitation Center." Ethan stared at her in amazement. "And the sheriff just accepted that?" "He did after I mentioned that Lisa Chen herself had personally approved the application." Jessie's smile widened. "Plus, it seems our friend Tyler has already made himself unpopular with the local law enforcement. Apparently, he's been throwing his weight around town, mentioning his connections a bit too often for the sheriff's taste." Relief flooded through Ethan. "So we're in the clear?" Jessie's expression sobered slightly. "For now, Tyler's the type to hold a grudge, and his uncle does have influence. But we've bought ourselves some time, at least." As evening approached, Scout seemed more energetic than he had in weeks, even playfully batting at a piece of string Jessie dangled for him. Watching them together, Ethan felt something he hadn't experienced in years, a sense of his small cabin becoming a home again, filled with more than just quiet resignation. "He really likes you," Ethan observed as Scout gently headbutted Jessie's hand for more attention. "The feeling's mutual," she replied, scratching behind the lynx's ears. "He's extraordinary, Ethan, the way he responds, how he seems to understand." She trailed off, looking slightly embarrassed. "I know it sounds silly." "Not to me," Ethan said quietly. "There've been times I swear he knows exactly what I'm thinking. During the worst days after Rebecca passed, he wouldn't leave my side. Not for anything." Jessie nodded, understanding in her eyes. "Animals sense things we can't sometimes, or maybe they just love more purely than we do." When it came time for her to leave, Ethan found himself reluctant to see her go. Standing in the doorway, he struggled to find the right words. "I don't know how to thank you for everything you've done." Jessie smiled, the fading sunlight catching in her dark hair. "You already have, by showing me what dedication really looks like." She hesitated, then added, "I'll be back tomorrow with the morning medications and hopefully some news about the permits." After she left, Ethan sat on the porch steps, Scout beside him, both watching her truck disappear down the winding road. For the first time in weeks, the weight on Ethan's shoulders felt slightly lighter. Between Scout's improving health and the unexpected alliance with Jesse, he dared to hope that things might work out after all. Little did he know that Tyler Jackson was not a man who accepted defeat easily, and that the coming days would test not only his resolve, but the strength of the new bonds forming in his once solitary life. The next morning dawned clear and bright, a perfect Montana spring day. Ethan woke feeling more rested than he had in weeks. Scout, curled at the foot of his bed, a return to their old routine that felt like coming home after a long journey. Outside, birds called to one another, and the scent of pine drifted through the partially open window. As Ethan prepared breakfast, he caught himself humming a tune Rebecca used to sing, something he hadn't done since her illness. Scout seemed stronger today, moving about the cabin with increased steadiness, his eyes bright and attentive. When the lynx approached his food bowl without prompting and began to eat, Ethan felt a surge of hope so powerful it nearly overwhelmed him. "Looking good this morning, buddy," he said, his voice rough with emotion. The sound of tires on gravel announced Jessie's arrival. Through the window, Ethan watched her emerge from her truck, the morning sunlight catching her hair. She carried not just her usual medical bag, but also what appeared to be a basket covered with a checkered cloth. "Brought breakfast," she announced as she entered, holding up the basket. "Blueberry muffins from Mary's bakery in town. Best in 3 counties." As they ate at the small kitchen table, Jessie shared news that made the muffins taste even sweeter. "Lisa called this morning. The preliminary review of our application looks promising. They've fast-tracked it due to Scout's medical situation, and the fact that he's been with you for 5 years helps our case." Scout, as if understanding the good news, approached Jessie and gently bumped his head against her leg in what had become his customary greeting to her. She laughed, scratching behind his ears. "The change in him is remarkable," she observed. "Even just since I first saw him last week." After breakfast, they went through Scout's morning medication routine, now a well-practiced ballet of pills hidden in meat, herbal supplements, and gentle encouragement. When they finished, Jessie suggested taking Scout outside for a short walk, his first real exercise since falling ill. "The fresh air and movement will be good for him," she explained. "Just enough to stimulate, not exhaust." Together, they walked. A small circuit around the cabin, Scout moving cautiously but with growing confidence. When they reached a sunny spot near the tree line, the lynx surprised them both by settling in the grass, rolling onto his back in a patch of sunlight, looking for all the world like an oversized house cat. Jessie's laughter rang out, the sound echoing against the mountains. "I've tracked wild lynx for years and never seen one so at ease." Ethan found himself smiling too, not just at Scout's antics, but at the joy in Jessie's expression. Something was changing between them, a connection forming that went beyond their shared concern for Scout. Standing beside her in the morning light, Ethan felt possibilities opening before him that he'd long ago abandoned. Their peaceful moment was interrupted by the distant sound of vehicles, multiple engines approaching from the main road. Scout immediately rolled to his feet, ears forward, body tense. Jessie and Ethan exchanged concerned glances. "Get Scout inside," Jessie said, quietly. "I'll see who it is." Ethan quickly led Scout back to the cabin, while Jessie moved toward the driveway. By the time he joined her outside, 3 vehicles had pulled up. Tyler's now familiar black truck, another expensive SUV with government plates, and a third vehicle marked with the State Wildlife Department logo. Tyler emerged first, that self-satisfied smirk firmly in place. From the government SUV stepped an older man in an expensive suit, the family resemblance to Tyler immediately marking him as the uncle with Wildlife Commission connections. The third vehicle yielded a uniformed wildlife officer looking distinctly uncomfortable with the situation. "Mr. Miller," the older man called out, his voice carrying the practiced authority of someone used to being obeyed. "I'm Commissioner James Jackson. I understand you're keeping a protected species on your property without proper authorization." Before Ethan could respond, Jessie stepped forward, her professional demeanor firmly in place. "Commissioner Jackson, I'm Jessica Armstrong with the Montana Wildlife Rehabilitation Center. Mr. Miller has already filed all necessary permits for Scout with the full backing of our organization and Dr. Lisa Chen of the State Advisory Board." The commissioner's eyebrows rose slightly. "Ms. Armstrong, I wasn't aware the Rehabilitation Center was involved in this matter." "We've been overseeing Scout's medical treatment for the past week," Jessie replied smoothly. "As you may know, he's recovering from a rare autoimmune condition that requires specialized care." Tyler stepped forward, impatience evident in his stance. "The fact remains, Uncle, that until those permits are approved, keeping a lynx as a pet is illegal. The animal should be confiscated and placed in proper care." "By proper care, I assume you mean your private collection in Texas?" Jessie asked, her tone deceptively light. Tyler's eyes narrowed. "I have all necessary permits for my animals, some of which were obtained under questionable circumstances according to Wyoming wildlife officials," Jessie countered. The commissioner cleared his throat, clearly annoyed at losing control of the conversation. "The issue at hand is the legality of Mr. Miller's situation, not my nephew's collection." He turned to the wildlife officer. "Officer Reynolds, please proceed with the inspection." Officer Reynolds, a young man who looked increasingly caught in the middle of a situation he hadn't anticipated, nodded reluctantly. "Mr. Miller, I'll need to examine the animal and your facilities." "Of course," Ethan replied, finding his voice at last. "But I want it on record that Scout has been under my care for 5 years with the full knowledge of retiring Ranger Frank Daniels, and that we've initiated the proper permitting process." As they moved toward the cabin, Jessie's phone rang. Checking the display, she answered immediately, stepping slightly away from the group. Her conversation was brief but intense, and when she rejoined them, there was a new confidence in her step. Inside, Scout had retreated to his bed near the fireplace, his posture alert but not aggressive. Officer Reynolds approached slowly, professionally assessing the animal and his surroundings, while Commissioner Jackson and Tyler remained by the door, the latter's eyes fixed covetously on Scout. "He appears well cared for," Reynolds noted, making entries in his tablet, "and the cabin modifications for his needs are appropriate." He gestured to the custom shelves and climbing structures Ethan had built years ago to allow Scout to express his natural behaviors. As the inspection continued, Jessie moved to stand beside Ethan, discreetly showing him a text message on her phone from Lisa Chen. "Permit approved on emergency basis. Official documents being emailed now." Hope surged through Ethan, but he kept his expression neutral, not wanting to tip their hand too soon. Commissioner Jackson, growing impatient, stepped forward. "Officer Reynolds, what's your assessment?" Before Reynolds could answer, Jessie spoke up. "Commissioner, I've just received word from the State Wildlife Board that Mr. Miller's emergency permit application has been approved, effective immediately." She held up her phone, displaying the email with attached documents. "Scout is now legally registered as a rehabilitation ambassador animal under the joint care of Mr. Miller and the Montana Wildlife Rehabilitation Center." The commissioner's face tightened with barely concealed anger. "Let me see those documents." While the officials reviewed the permit on Jessie's phone, Tyler paced the small cabin, his frustration evident. As he passed near Scout's bed, the lynx emitted a low warning growl, causing Tyler to jump back. "See, the animal is aggressive," Tyler declared, pointing accusingly at Scout. "The animal is protecting his home from someone he perceives as a threat," Jessie corrected calmly. "A perfectly natural response, especially for an animal still recovering from illness." Commissioner Jackson, having confirmed the legitimacy of the permit, handed the phone back to Jesse with obvious reluctance. "It appears the paperwork is in order," he admitted grudgingly. "However, this permit is conditional on regular inspections and continued involvement of the rehabilitation center, which we're happy to provide," Jesse assured him. Tyler wasn't ready to concede. "This is ridiculous. That permit was fast-tracked because of connections, not merit. The animal belongs in a professional facility." "Like yours?" Ethan asked quietly, his patience finally breaking. "Where he'd be just another trophy in your collection. Scout belongs here. He always has." "The matter is settled legally," Officer Reynolds interjected, clearly eager to defuse the situation. "The permit has been granted. My inspection confirms the animal is being properly cared for, and Ms. Armstrong's involvement ensures professional oversight." Commissioner Jackson sighed, shooting a quelling look at his nephew. "Very well, but be advised, Mr. Miller, that any violation of the permit conditions will result in immediate removal of the animal." His tone made it clear that he would be looking for any such violation. After the officials departed, Tyler storming off without another word, Ethan and Jesse stood in stunned silence for a moment before breaking into relieved laughter. Scout, sensing the change in atmosphere, approached them both, rubbing against their legs in a rare display of affection. "We did it," Ethan said softly, kneeling, to stroke Scout's fur. "You're home for good, buddy." Jessie knelt beside him, her hand joining his on Scout's back. "The permit conditions actually work in our favor. With the rehabilitation center officially involved, you'll have resources and support you didn't have before." Their eyes met over Scout's head, a moment of shared triumph and something deeper passing between them. Impulsively, Ethan reached out and took her hand in his. "I couldn't have done this without you, Jessie." Her fingers tightened around his. "You started this journey long before I came along, Ethan. I just helped you finish it." The weeks that followed brought steady improvement in Scout's health. The combination of medications, herbal treatments, and simply having the weight of uncertainty lifted seemed to accelerate his recovery. By mid-May, he was back to his old routines, supervising Ethan's woodworking from his favorite perch, exploring the property boundaries, and occasionally bringing home small gifts from his hunting expeditions. Jessie's visits continued, evolving from medical necessity to something both she and Ethan looked forward to for entirely different reasons. She helped Ethan prepare for the first official inspection under the new permit, ensuring everything was documented properly. When Officer Reynolds returned for that inspection, alone this time, without the Jacksons, he was clearly impressed by Scout's progress and the detailed records they had kept. "You know," Reynolds confided as he was leaving, "this is how these situations should work. The animal's welfare first, bureaucracy second." With a wink, he added, "Don't tell the commissioner I said that." One sunny afternoon in early June, Ethan was working on a new rocking chair commission when Jessie's truck arrived. She had been in Bozeman for a wildlife photography exhibition for the past 3 days, the longest they had been apart since Scout's illness began. As she approached the workshop, Ethan felt his heart lighten at the sight of her. "How'd the exhibition go?" he asked, setting aside his tools. "Sold 6 prints," she replied with a smile, "including one of Scout that I took last month." Scout himself emerged from beneath the workbench where he had been napping, stretching languidly before trotting over to greet Jessie with his customary head bump. "I missed you too," she laughed, scratching behind his ears. To Ethan, she added, "Actually, that's partly why I'm here. The exhibition curator was fascinated by Scout's story. She wants to feature it in a special showcase on wildlife rehabilitation success stories, with your permission, of course." Ethan considered this. What would it involve? Just photographs, mostly. Maybe a short video of Scout in his environment, showing how well he's adapted. It could help change perceptions about rehabilitation and human-wildlife relationships. Looking at Jesse and Scout together, Ethan felt a surge of pride. I think Rebecca would have liked that idea, using Scout's story to help other animals. She sounds like she was an amazing woman, Jesse said softly. She was. She would have liked you too. The words came naturally, without the pain that usually accompanied memories of Rebecca. Instead, Ethan felt a sense of continuity, as if the love he had shared with his wife had opened his heart to new possibilities rather than closing it forever. 2 weeks later, Jessie arrived with her photography equipment and a surprise. Dr. Collins, who had first diagnosed Scout, and Lisa Chen from the Wildlife Board. The small gathering expanded when Frank Daniels showed up, officially retired now, but eager to see Scout's progress. Thought it would be good to have everyone who played a part in Scout's recovery for the documentary, Jesse explained. Plus, it strengthens our case for the permanent permit renewal next month. As Jessie set up her equipment, Scout seemed to understand the importance of the occasion, positioning himself regally on his favorite rock overlooking the property. The afternoon unfolded in a series of photographs and informal interviews, Scout occasionally stealing the show with perfectly timed behaviors that had everyone laughing. During a break in filming, Ethan overheard Frank talking with Lisa about Tyler Jackson. "Seems he's abandoned his Montana adventure," Frank said. "Word is, he's headed back to Texas. His property's already on the market." Lisa nodded. The Wildlife Commission received some concerning reports about his collection practices. Let's just say his uncle's influence can only extend so far. Ethan felt the last weight lifting from his shoulders at the news. With Tyler gone, Scout's future seemed even more secure. As the day drew to a close and their guests departed, Ethan and Jessie sat on the porch steps, watching the sunset paint the mountains in gold and crimson. Scout lounged nearby, contentedly, grooming himself after all the attention. "Thank you," Ethan said simply, taking Jessie's hand in his. "Not just for today, but for everything since you showed up on my doorstep." Jessie smiled, leaning slightly against his shoulder. "You know, when Dr. Collins first told me about a man with a pet lynx living in the mountains, I thought I was going to find some eccentric recluse with a wild animal in deplorable conditions. Instead, you found a regular recluse with a spoiled lynx who has his own couch," Ethan quipped. "I found a man with more compassion and strength than most people I've ever met," Jessie corrected softly, "and a lynx who changed both our lives." As if on cue, Scout abandoned his grooming and moved to join them, settling at their feet with a contented sigh. The three of them sat together as twilight deepened into night, stars appearing one by one in the vast Montana sky. Ethan realized that his small cabin, once a refuge of solitude, had transformed into something he had stopped hoping for. A home, filled with connection and possibility. Scout's illness, though frightening, had opened a door he might never have found otherwise. The following month, Scout's permanent permit was approved without controversy. The documentary about his recovery and the unique bond he shared with Ethan became part of the Montana Wildlife Center's educational program, inspiring others to support rehabilitation efforts across the state. Jessie's photography career flourished, but she never strayed far from the small cabin in the mountains. Her own place near the rehabilitation center gradually held less and less of her time and belongings, until one winter morning, Ethan suggested a more permanent arrangement. Scout, now fully recovered and more majestic than ever, seemed to approve of the change, creating space on his couch for Jessie's ancient cat Theo, who reluctantly adapted to having a lynx as a housemate. On quiet evenings, Ethan would sometimes look around at this unlikely family they had created, a woodworker who had once resigned himself to solitude, a wildlife photographer who had found her subject and her heart in the same remote cabin. A dignified lynx who had defied both illness and law to remain where he belonged, and a cantankerous old cat who had somehow made peace with it all. In those moments, Ethan understood what Rebecca had always told him about love being the most powerful force in the world, capable of healing wounds, crossing boundaries, and creating connections that defy explanation. Scout's journey from abandoned cub to beloved companion had not only saved the lynx's life, but had ultimately saved Ethan's as well, bringing light and love back into a world that had grown dim. And in the golden eyes of the lynx who had started it all, Ethan sometimes caught a gleam of what could only be described as satisfaction, as if Scout had known all along that some bonds, once formed, can never truly be broken. Dear listeners, we hope Ethan and Scout's journey of resilience and hope has touched your heart. The bond between a man and his extraordinary companion reminds us that love and determination can overcome even the most challenging obstacles. For more emotionally compelling stories like this one, we've prepared a special playlist with equally captivating narratives. Find it by clicking the link to your left. If this story moved you, please don't forget to subscribe to our channel and give this video a thumbs up. Every day, we bring you unique stories that explore the depth and complexity of life's relationships. What was your favorite moment in Ethan and Scout's journey? Was it when Jesse first arrived to help, or perhaps when Scout rallied his strength to protect his beloved owner? Share your thoughts in the comments below. Join our community of storytelling enthusiasts and never miss our upcoming content. The wilderness of human emotions awaits your exploration in our next tale. We look forward to reading your comments.